Hello everyone, it's day 17 and today we're gonna go through the documentation for day 4 of learning the Client-First framework by Finsweet. So let's go. The fluid responsive. Add fluid responsive to any Client-First projects using a visual fluid scaling tool. No calculations, no writing custom CSS, no JavaScript. So this seems like something very convenient. Few options for making client-first Webflow site fluid responsive. The visual CSS snippet configurator on this page. Same visual configurator in Finsweet extension. Okay, what is fluid responsive? As the browser viewport changes size, the design scales with it. Okay, that sounds cool. Client-first fluid responsive compared to VW and VH scaling. As the browser viewport changes size, the design scales with it. Using VW or VH units is one way to make our content fluid responsive when scaling. The problems with this method are we must set VW and VH unit sizes on every element we want to be fluid responsive. Elements can quickly become too small or too large because of linear scaling. VW and VH scale linearly. Accessibility suffers because browser zooming cannot affect both VW and VH units. It can be challenging to manage and maintain our Webflow project, VW and VH, especially for other developers and clients. Client-first uses root font scaling instead. Root font scaling. Client-first system uses RAM units for all sizes. The RAM unit is based on one thing, HTML root font size. Everything in our project is relative to the HTML font size. Because of this, we have global managed control over all sizes in our project. By modifying this size, we are effectively making our RAMs larger or smaller visually. Our visual fluid responsive generator runs on an extensive set of calculations that modify root font size according to our preferences. So basically our root font size from HTML is like 16 pixels normally, and somehow this fluid responsive generator is manipulating this root HTML font size to fit the scaling of the page. Adding the CSS code makes our Webflow project follow custom size scaling rules. Changing the HTML font size across breakpoints gives us ultimate customization of our fluid responsive scaling. What are the benefits? Use client-first like you usually use it. There is no specific workflow change for fluid responsive sites versus non-fluid responsive sites. The fluid responsive strategy is an optimal add-on. Add it or don't add it to any project. Fluid responsive can be added at the end of the project after everything is developed. This is amazing. Browsers can zoom normally. Browser font size settings that are modified by end users will be respected. Maintaining a Webflow project in RAM is easier than a project with fixed VW or VH based sizing. So we have to use RAM always and follow all the principles from client-first for fluid responsive to work. Visually configure the fluid responsive scaling rules. Copy the CSS code to the client-first Webflow project. Enjoy a fluid responsive site in RAMs. Amazing. We can see here the fluid responsive generator. I'm not sure yet how we're gonna use it. We can see here it's updating from the code snippet that we have to add maybe in the code embed. And it's updating when we drag and drop this generator. It will take some time to learn the best practices. I think there are videos here with examples. We have to watch the videos to understand more, but we're gonna use this a lot. But before using it, we must follow the client-first principles from Webflow to use the RAM unit for sizing, and everything will be smooth and work perfectly normal. Let's see now the semantic HTML tags. This I think is very important topic. It's very important for the SEO and for the accessibility of the website. Super important. Let's go. What are semantic HTML tags? Semantic HTML tag clearly describes what an element is. Elements such as header, footer, and article are all considered semantic. They describe the purpose of the element and type of content that is inside the element. Semantic tags are here to help users and machines better interpret our content. Why do we want to use semantic HTML tags? We want to use them because they make our site more accessible, better user experience, improve how search engines crawl our website, better SEO and discoverability. This is super important. What is accessibility? If we take the definition of Wikipedia, accessibility refers to the design of products, devices, services, or environments for people who experience disabilities. Applying this to our web development field, we understand it as Web A11y that anyone at any moment can use your website. If a user is sighted, it's easy to know what the sidebar is. It's easy to know what a nav is. It's easy to know what the main content is. A sighted user may not care about the difference between a regular div and a main tag, because they're both just a div. There may not be any change in their viewing experience. However, people with screen readers and machine web crawlers rely on these descriptive tags to understand the base content. To follow best accessibility practices, we must use semantic HTML tags while developing. Okay, how to use semantic tags in Webflow. Webflow makes it super easy to add semantic tags. To change an element tag, do the following. Select the element, go to the settings panel, D, choose a tag from the dropdown. And that's it, very easy. How do I choose which tag to use? These short descriptions are taken directly from Webflow Designer. Header specifies a header for the document or a section. Footer defines a footer for the document or a section. Nav defines navigation links in the document. Main defines the main content of a document. Section defines a section in the document. Article defines an article in the document. Site defines content aside from the page content. Address defines the contact information for the author, owner of a document or an article. Figure defines self-contained content like illustrations, diagrams, photos, codebox, etc. H1, H6. These elements represent levels of section headings from highest to lowest. There are many more semantic tags available to us as web developers. The tags above are the most important ones when using Webflow. So we're gonna use these tags a lot. The header, the footer, the nav, the main, section, article, aside, address, figure, and H1 to H6. H1 to H6 are very important because when the search engines crawl our website, they will know exactly how our content is structured and what is important and what is more important based on the tag. If it's H1, it's the more important. H6. So this structure tells exactly how the crawler to read our content. Basic semantic structure. First, we will focus on header, main, and footer. Header. The header tag is most commonly used to wrap a website's navbar. In Client-First, we would most likely add this tag to our nav component or an equal. But it can also specify the header of a section or an article. Both of these approaches are correct. According to W3 Schools, we can have more than one header tags on a page. However, a header cannot be placed within a footer, address, or another header element. The use of a header is flexible and used differently throughout the web. If we inspect other sites, we will see that some developers use the header tag only on the navbar, while others use the header tag multiple times. For example, if you look at an article on the USA.gov website, we will see that each heading, H1, H6, is wrapped with a header tag. If we look at the article page of the EU, we will see that only the header is used only to wrap the navbar. The main tag. The main tag defines the main content of our page. On most pages, the main tag is used to wrap the main content of the page. It's usually everything between the header and the footer. The content inside the main element should be unique to the page. The header and footer should not be included inside the main tag. The main tag should not contain any content that is repeated across pages, such as sidebars, navigation links, copyright information, site logos, search forms, or cookie consent. The most common tags we will see inside the main are sections and articles. In Client-First, we add the main tag to our main wrapper class. Okay, so our main wrapper class will get the main tag. And all of our content will be there. The page content. I mean the main content. Footer. A footer element usually contains authorship information, copyright information, contact information, sitemap, back to top links, related documents. The footer tag relates to the nearest section parent. That can be either a section or the whole page. For example, we might have a footer at the bottom of an article that relates to the article. We might have another footer at the bottom of our page that serves as our page footer. Sectioning elements. A section tag is used for sectioning our web page. Sections should always have a heading with very few exceptions. In most cases, we will have several sections in our main. You can see here, section header. Everything is in the main wrapper. Section header, section testimonials, section features. Here's a simple example of a website divided into sections. Note that we can also have sections within an article tag, and vice versa. We can even have sections within sections. The article tag specifies independent, self-contained content. An article should make sense on its own. It should be possible to distribute it independently from the rest of the site. A common misconception is using article tags only on blog posts. We can use the article tag on any of the following: forum post, magazine, newspaper article, blog entry, product card, user submitted comment, interactive widget or gadget, or any other independent item of content. Aside. The aside tag defines some content aside from the primary content. The aside content should relate to the surrounding content. Use the aside tag to wrap page-related sidebars, related links, related content, advertisements, tables of content. The aside element should be inside the related section element. This means that if our aside relates to a section, it should be inside that section. If our aside relates to the whole page, then place it outside any section tag. For example, we could place next to the main. Nav. The nav element specifies a list of navigation links. Here are some common places where we want to use the nav tag. Navbar links, sidebar links, table of content, footer links, breadcrumbs. Okay, makes sense. Headings, H1 to H6. The H1 to H6 elements represent 6 levels of section headings. H1 is the highest section level, and H6 is the lowest. Use only one H1 per page. The H1 should be the title of our page. When a user lands on our site and reads the H1 heading, they should understand what the page is about. Our H1 should be descriptive and clear. Yeah, this is super important. We should have only one H1. Nesting headings. Use the H2 tag to cover subtopics of our H1. Use the H3 tag should be used to cover subtopics of the H2 and so on. Okay. Users with screen readers often jump from heading to understand our page. Because of this, it's essential not to skip heading levels. Skipping a heading level may create confusion, as the person navigating this way may wonder where the missing heading is. Okay, makes sense. So our heading structure will be super clear and executed well. Figures, addresses, and others. Addresses. The address tag specifies contact information for the author, owner of a page or an article. We can have more than one article tag on a page. If you place the address tag within the article, it refers to the article. When an address tag is placed outside of an article, then it refers to the whole page. For example, if we include our company address in the footer, the address tag will refer to the whole page document. Okay, figure. The figure tag specifies self-contained content, like illustrations, diagrams, photos, code listings, etc. While the content of the figure element relates to the main flow, its position is independent of the main flow. Removing a figure should not affect the flow of the page. We might have noticed that the figure tag is automatically added to around any rich text, image, or video when we add a description. We can use this tag to wrap images when we see fit. Note that the figure tag is not as crucial for accessibility and SEO as adding alt text to the visual content. Okay, so the alt text is more important than the figure tag. Semantic HTML clonable. We developed clonable project that outlines semantic HTML tags inside the Webflow project. The clonable helps us visualize the correct use of the HTML semantic tags. Okay, we should check this clonable. I'm gonna check it later. Now I'm just gonna go through the documentation. Everyone should do it. We're gonna see exactly how the right structure looks from here, but now let's go with the accessibility. I think this is very important. Even in the Webflow way, in the Webflow page, they always say how important is the accessibility. It's not only important for the people with disabilities, like people that don't have sight, that are blind, or they can't type, but it's also important for the web crawlers and how the Google and the AI engines read our website and show our content for people that are searching for our content. What is accessibility? The terms accessibility, commonly referred as A11Y, is not only restricted to web development, but applies to many different aspects of life. If we take the definition of Wikipedia, accessibility refers to a design of products, devices, services, or environments for people who experience disabilities. Applying this to our web development field, we understand it as Web A11Y means that anyone at any moment can use your website. Why is web accessibility so important? Don't fall under the widespread assumption that A11Y is only needed for people with severe disabilities like blindness or reduced mobility. There are actually more types of disabilities that usually people don't think of. Permanently disabled users. The user has a severe disability like blindness or deafness. Temporary disabled users. The user has a physical or mental disability which hinders his discharging of responsibilities for a short period of time. Conditional or situational disabled users. The user is not able to do things due to the current situation he is in. Example, slow internet connection, browsing, while eating. Okay, about this guide. This guide won't go too deep into the basics, as there is already a lot of quality content available. Instead, this docs page will focus on specific accessibility challenges that we experience inside Webflow as a platform. Keyboard navigation. Due to physical restrictions, many users rely on the keyboard to navigate through our website. This section explains how we can make sure our whole website is keyboard navigation friendly. Basic controls. Tab key. The tab key is used to move around the page by focusing the available elements. Every time the user hits the tab key, the focus will move to the next focusable element. Holding shift reverses the direction. It is important to make sure that all elements a regular mouse user would click on the page are also focusable with the tab key. This also implies that all focusable items should have their focus styled. Otherwise, the user won't be able to distinguish what element they're currently focusing on. This is for the tab key, super important. Now the enter key. When focusing on an element, the enter key should activate links or buttons. Non-standard items like divs using row attributes need JS implemented for this. Send forms. Space key. Space key should activate buttons, activate toggle states like checkboxes or radios. This also includes buttons that toggle some functionality like an accordion. Arrow keys. Navigate through grouped children of a component like tap links, radio buttons, accordion toggles, etc. Change the value of it. Escape key. Closing a model. Okay, focusability. All elements that are clickable on the page should be focusable too. Standard HTML elements have this functionality built in by default, but sometimes we need to tell the browsers to do so. In these cases, it can be achieved by adding the tab index attribute. The value set to it will depend on the wanted behavior. And we can see here the different attributes, different value, programmatic focus. To improve the UX for keyboard navigation and screen reader, sometimes it's a good idea to programmatically focus an element when a certain condition is met. Some examples are focusing the close button right after opening a model, or moving the focus to a certain element that appeared on the page. However, always think of the UX. There are some cases where it's not a good idea to automatically focus an element that appears on the page, like switching tabs in the tabs component. Okay, HTML semantics. We already know a little bit about this. Using button tags in Webflow. The main purpose of this tag is to tell the user that an element is clickable and will trigger an action on the page. This includes actions like expanding, collapsing elements like accordions, showing, hiding elements, example hamburger menu or drop-down list, or custom app-like functionalities like to-do item to a list. Do not confuse button tags with the button component in Webflow. This with explanation mark, so it's very important. Do not confuse button tags with the button component in Webflow. It's important to understand the difference between button tags and A tags. Button activate actions on the page. Anchor tag navigate through the page website. Okay, behind the curtains, the Webflow button component is just a regular HTML anchor link with some styles sprinkled on top of it. Okay, we can see here it's just an anchor tag with styles. Unfortunately, using the button tag in Webflow is not possible to do as of the time of writing this guide, unless using an embed component, which is not ideal. When the use of a button tag is needed, we must use a div instead with the following conditions. It has a row with button attribute. It's keyboard focusable with the tap index attribute. It fires a click event when the enter or space key is pressed. If the button has not pressed states like a toggle, it must have an area pressed attribute reflecting the current state. If the button controls the expansion collapse of another element like an accordion, it must have an area expanded attribute reflecting the current state. Okay. Creating HTML tables in Webflow. The table element is not available to be used natively in Webflow. We can still build accessible tables using regular divs, meaning that the screen reader will be able to read the content in the proper order, following rows and columns. Using the area ARIA rows defined for this purpose. Okay, we must use this row for this purpose. This is shown in this guide in the area rows row table section. Okay, we're gonna see it. Hiding elements on the page. Aside from the most famous display none style that hides the element from the structure of our page, there are some times where we want an element to only be visible to a part of the user's base. Hiding elements from the screen readers only. While parsing the content of our page, the screen reader will read out loud as much information as it can to describe it to the user. There are some elements, though, that do not have any information attached to them, such as visual elements like style divs or SVG elements. In those cases, we want the screen readers to just skip them so they don't break the reading flow. This can be achieved by using the area hidden attribute. More on this on the area section below. Hiding elements for regular users only. On the other hand, there are some times where we're using a visual representation of some content, like a fancy SVG as the title of our page, but still want to provide context of it to create readers and crawling bots. We can achieve this by using CSS to visually hiding the content in a way that it will still be picked by screen readers and crawling bots. We can see here how it's done. This technique is used by many big sites like Apple. We can see it here. Okay. Visually hidden. Okay. Area. The MDN web docs describe area as accessible rich internet applications. So it's basically a super accessible application. Accessible rich internet application is a set of attributes that define ways to make web content and web applications, especially those developed with JavaScript, more accessible to people with disabilities. Okay, web building starting sites with no interactivity, usually sticking to just using correct HTML semantics is almost enough. But when adding custom functionalities using JavaScript, Webflow interaction counted as it, we need to provide more context to the user with disabilities so they can correctly read and use our site. Note: Webflow's native components like navbar, slider, tabs, etc. already use the correct area attributes with the required JavaScript for the dynamic ones. Okay, this is good to know. Accessible rich internet applications rows. Elements that provide specific functionality to the page, thus they perform a row, must be defined so screen readers can understand the context of the action situations. When using basic HTML semantic elements like button, nav, anchor, input, etc., these rows attributes are not needed, as both the browser and the screen reader devices already understand their purpose. We won't list all of the available rows. Below are the most commonly used ones. We can check the full list on MDN docs. Okay, row equals button. Used to define an element that doesn't have a button tag that is acting like it. So this is how we make it known that it's a button and what the row is. Row list box used to define an element that contains a list of options to choose from. The row option used to define an element that represents an option in a list of options, usually combined with the area selected attribute. Row table, row group, row header, row, column header used to define an HTML table structure where. Okay, we can see here area attributes. How an element is announced by a screen reader is usually determined by its content. Determined. This is how I should pronounce this word. Determined. How an element is announced by a screen reader is usually determined by its content. For example, a text link like this. See here, there is no row here. Will be read out loud as go to Webflow. But there are some times where the content doesn't explain the action that will be performed. Or maybe there isn't any content at all. Those cases, using area label will let us give more context to the user. Example we can see here. Area label, expand dropdown. So we give this row, expand dropdown. And now the screen reader will know what this element is doing. Okay, we can see here another attribute. Okay. In addition to an element label, screen readers can announce a reference element as its description, so the user can understand the context more deeply. Okay, we can see here the custom attribute, the value, the name, its description paragraph. Okay, makes sense. Area controls. This attribute creates a cause and effect relationship. It identifies the elements that are controlled by the current element. Example, a button that opens a model. When clicking it should have. We can see here custom attributes, area controls model, the name area controls, and the value model, where model is the ID of the model element. Okay, makes sense. There are many situations where a user needs to be able to toggle an element visibility, such as when opening a hamburger menu or a model dialog. Usually when the element becomes visible on the page, the user spots it right away. This is not the case for blind people who need their screen reader devices to notify them about these changes. This is where area expanded comes into place, allowing us to define the status of the element that is being controlled. This attribute should be paired with the area controls want to provide the full context of the action to the user. The value is set to true false using JavaScript depending on the element state. We can see here. Complementary to the area expanded attribute, we can further define what has been expanded with this attribute. It accepts the following values: menu, list box, tree, grid, dialog. Some elements require a visual confirmation that have been pressed, like a custom switch being toggled on and off. Screen readers can be notified about this newly achieved state with the area pressed attribute. The value is set to true false using JavaScript depending on the element state. Used to identify the current item in a set of items. This has different applications. Page used as defines an element that has the current URL where the user is located, usually set to the links that points to the current page. Important. Webflow's current state in the designer only adds w-current CSS class to the element, but not the area current attribute. Okay, this seems important. Location, date, and step. Okay, when building custom selection interfaces like a custom dropdown of options or a combo box, we need to notify the screen readers that element is the one selected at the moment. Okay, this attribute must be set dynamically, pointing to the element in the list that is currently selected. Okay, we can see it here. Area hidden, as seen in hiding element only from screen readers. Sometimes a visual element provides no context to the user when reading it with a screen reader. Letting the attribute area hidden equals true will make them skip this element from being read out loud. It makes sense. Commonly used components. Building accordions in Webflow. Trigger. As was stack, you have to rely on diffs with the row button and use JS to trigger a click event on enter or space key. If using a diff, it needs to have tab index to make it keyboard navigatable. It should also have its focus style, the focus state styled. Use area controls for defining the collapsible content. Use area expanded for defining the state of the collapsible content. Should not be hidden by default. Rely on JS to hide it when the page loads. This can be done with IX2. I think this is the GSAP animations, but I'm not sure. To make sure people with disabled JS can see it. Use area labeled B to define the trigger of it. Labeled by. Okay. Other cool stuff we found. When there are more than one accordion, using the arrow key should move the focus between triggers. Using the home key should focus the first accordion. Using the end key should focus the last accordion. Check it out here. Link to a doc. Bad practices for accessibility. Not using HTML semantic elements when available. There are some cases like the button elements where we are forced to find a workaround due to Webflow not providing them natively. But there are other cases where using a raw approach doesn't make sense. For example, links. Doing this is obviously preferred over this. Yeah, we shouldn't give a row. Okay. Although the regular users will notice No difference at all. Disabled users will not be able to navigate to the element and activate it with the keyboard, as well as other issues like SEO indexing of the link. It might seem obvious with this example, but there are other use cases where something like this could happen. Adding redundant attributes. Semantic elements, a form, nav, etc. will already be read by the screen readers. Adding to them an additional raw attribute will cause the screen reader to read it twice, which can get very annoying. There is an example here. We have a form row and then a form. So it will say form 2 times. And this is not ideal. Accessibility clonable. We have created a clonable, and we can see the clonable here. We should take a look at it for sure. And that's it. That is for day 4 of the learning path in the documentation, and there are three days left to go through all the documentation made by Finsweet. So that's it for today, guys. Thank you for watching. See you tomorrow. Bye bye.